Hub transport role, email address policies, transport rules, and journal rules. So, welcome to part 2 of the Hub transport role. And in this part, we're going to talk about some of the other things that you're going to be setting on that Hub transport role. First, recall that the whole job of the Hub transport role, bringing back up my little architecture diagram here, the whole job of that Hub transport role is to exist in the middle of all of your mailbox servers. It's there to exist as a single location where all of the mail is going to go through. And in its centralized location, because all the mail is going to be going through that Hub transport server, it becomes a single location where you can apply some very nice policies for things like compliance, for things like identifying mail rules, for things like journaling, all of those things that are kind of the more modern reasons why you want to do centralized policy-based control of mail. That's why we have that Hub transport server, because every single piece of mail has to go through it. Now, having that Hub transport mail allows us to do some very nice things. It allows us to configure the automatic generation of email addresses so that we have one location where those email addresses are going to be generated for our users. It also provides that same location where that email can be routed appropriately, as we talked about in the last nugget. Important also are these things called transport rules and journal rules. Again, that Hub transport role has that single centralized location so that we can create some sort of policy or many sorts of policies that define certain characteristics of those pieces of mail. Maybe we want to say if a piece of mail has certain dirty words in it, we want to do certain things. Maybe we want to say if certain characteristics of the mail exist, we want to copy it to another location. Maybe we want to send a journaling copy for later e-discovery or for compliance reasons because it's a piece of mail that's going outside of our organization. Maybe we want to set an email disclaimer for some legal speak that gets applied to the end of our mail whenever we go outside of our organization and off to the internet. All of these things can be done on the Hub transport role because, again, all of that mail gets sent through that Hub transport role, no matter whether it's going inside of your organization or out. In this nugget, we're going to talk about 3 specific things that you're going to be using with the Hub transport role: email address policies and automatically generating those email addresses, transport rules, and we're going to focus on a specific example of creating that email disclaimer I talked about a second ago, and then also these journal rules of how you'll create comprehensive message journaling. We've already talked about journaling just a little bit when we were talking about the mailbox server role, but here with the journal rules of the Hub transport role, those journal rules are actually going to be replicated through all the Hub transport servers, which provides a more comprehensive way to ensure that all that mail gets copied or journaled or moved around in the right places as is appropriate without having to worry about individual mailboxes and mailbox databases. So let's actually take a look again at our individual server here, and we were taking a look at the message or the queue viewer in our last nugget. I'm going to go back up here to the Hub transport server where we've got these 8 different tabs we were talking about in that last nugget. Now here in this Hub transport tab, the first thing we want to talk about are these email address policies over here in this tab. Now by default, you are going to have, just out of the box, you're going to have a default policy that is created for defining what the email addresses policy is going to be, or what the email addresses are going to be. The reason we have this is because your organization can have multiple different email addresses for particular users. Right? Remember in the last nugget we were talking about the idea of if the NuggetLab.com and the Contoso.com companies merged for some reason, and as a function of that merge, now we have 2 different sets of email addresses. Well, we've got those that are related to NuggetLab.com and those that are related to Contoso.com. Well, when we have new users, we want those new users to have their email addresses to get generated for them through some automated mechanism. And we can do that based off of certain conditions. Let me show you how this default policy works here. We'll step through this default policy so you can identify a little bit of these conditions. Notice here's the default policy here. We can include what recipient types we want to do, whether they're going to be resource mailboxes or exchange mailboxes or what have you. The important part here is under conditions, where we identify the different conditions that are going to be the focus for this email address policy. If a user has value X in attribute X, well then build their email address in this way. Okay, if they have attribute Y in value Y, then build their email address in a different way. Here you can see the default policy says essentially for everyone, for all of the recipient types, then go ahead and apply to them the email address at nuggetlab.com. Now I could go through here and add an additional email address if I wanted here by clicking the add button. I could say, okay, let me go ahead and create that email address, first name, last name at nuggetlab.com, right? I'm going to say, all right, if you have a user account in my Active Directory Forest, well, you're automatically going to get the email address firstname.lastname at nuggetlab.com. Pretty neat idea. Or I could use alias at nuggetlab.com, which is what I've got here. You'll see here that I'm not actually creating the local part. I'm just specifying the FQDN part here. I can do lots of different things for creating those email addresses. I could even add multiple addresses if I wanted to, and a different accepted domain. For example, that was where we added in the the contoso.com address, for example, and I can add in a contoso.com address if I wanted here with my default policy. Then once I've decided what I want to do, I need to set a schedule for when Exchange is actually going to go through and apply those policies to the different users. This can involve some resource utilization, so we want to make sure we apply it at some sort of time that's not going to impact our processing of mail. Once we're done here, we have the option of actually editing that policy and then applying that policy. This is the way that you go about in an automated fashion creating email addresses for your users. And it really helps so you don't have to go through in each individual user and wait to see if a new user comes in and then hand that person a new user. If they've got a mail-enabled account, they're going to get the email address just because of this email address policy. I can create new email address policies here too. Here's the contoso.com email address policy that I'm going to apply to, for example, users in the users OU, for example, and I'm going to use all recipient types, and I can set different conditions here. Okay, so this is the way that you'll go about configuring in an automated fashion those email addresses for your users on the Hub Transport role. Now, as that email gets sent around your organization, you may want to apply some of those transport rules to that email. You may want to do different things based off of different characteristics of each individual email. And you can do that here under transport rules. You see here, but by default, no transport rules are created, so we actually need to create a new transport rule associated with whatever we want to do with that mail as it gets routed around our organization or outbound. Let's just create one. We'll call it our transport rule for now. And what I want to do here is actually create this rule and base it off of a set of conditions. Okay, if I don't select anything here, it's going to apply the rule to everybody, right? In this case, maybe I want to set it to just people that are a member of a distribution list. Maybe I've created a list of bad users and I want the bad users' mail to be treated in a different way. Maybe if I'm sent to certain individuals, I want to treat a piece of mail in a different way. Maybe if the manager of any sender is in there, or if any of the recipients are people or a distribution list. You can see there's lots of different conditions that are here for identifying how you wanted to deal with this transport rule. I just want to apply this rule to all the messages. Okay. And what I want to do is every message that gets sent, I want to apply this rule. Now, once I've identified that, then I can do a certain set of actions associated with that piece of mail. I can set a header. I can remove a header. I can add a recipient. I can apply a classification to the message, for example. Now, one of the things that a lot of us like to do is we may want to create an email disclaimer. That email disclaimer text is some sort of legalese at the bottom of our email that says if you are not the intended recipient of this message, please delete it and spin around 3 times and fall down. Right? Well, this is the location where you can actually create that email disclaimer. Right? What we want to do here is we want to append a piece of disclaimer text. That's append as opposed to prepend. That disclaimer text, and the disclaimer text is if this wasn't meant for you, please spin around and fall down. Right? There's our disclaimer text. And then fail back to wrapping it or ignoring it for some reason I can't apply. Okay, this is going to set that to every piece of mail as it goes out. There may be some exceptions I want to set for this. Maybe if it's, again, a member of a distribution list, member of people. The exceptions are kind of similar to the conditions, except they provide a way for you to say when you don't want to do things. Click the next button here and actually create that rule. Poof. Now, every piece of mail that gets sent around our organization is going to have that goofy little explain text, disclaimer text that's sent to the bottom. You may not necessarily, though, need to set email disclaimers for all of the pieces of mail as they're running around your organization. Maybe you don't need to send it to every piece of email. Maybe you only need to send it to mail whenever you're sending it outbound, outside of your organization. Right? Maybe whenever you're sending it to users that are not inside or outside, but to users that are outside the organization. Now you can restrict that email disclaimer so only when it's being sent to somebody else somewhere out in the world, because you already trust all the people inside of your organization. So you see here, that's the process you would go through for creating these transport rules. And really, whatever sort of creativity you can come up with and whatever rules you can come up with based off of compliance regulations or your own security policy or what have you, are going to determine how you're going to create these transport rules. Now remember here, you see there's a priority value, so if you create new transport rules here, those will be prioritized, and those with lower priority will actually overwrite those with higher priority. So just be conscious of that prioritization, and don't create conflicting transport rules, because things can get a little squirrely. Now the other thing that you may want to do is under journal rules. Now a journal rule is kind of like a special kind of transport rule. Essentially with a journal rule, what you're saying is that when you get the message, or when you get the message according to certain requirements, then send a copy of the message to some sort of journaling location where it can sit for e-discovery purposes, for compliance reasons, right? So our journal rule here, and we may want to send a report when we've actually journaled an email, right? We may want to send that to the administrator, for example. Do we want to send all of the messages to the journaling location? Do we want to send internal or external messages? And then do we want to enable the rule, right? This again allows us that mechanism of creating very easily all the things we need to do in order to journal those rules. If we take a look at the properties here, properties are very similar to how we did before. And again, remember that because this is set at the organization level, these rules are going to be replicated out to all the different hub transport servers in our environment. So it's a nice single location where we can set these rules and in both cases have the reasonable assurance that they're going to be propagated out to all of the different servers without any worry. Now lastly, down here are some global settings here associated with transport. Not terribly interesting. We've seen these kind of before. This is another location where you can set transport limits on maximum send and receive size. So again, making sure that whenever you're sending and receiving mail inside and outside of your organization, that you're limiting the size of it and also the maximum number of recipients of it. Also important here is the transport dumpster. The transport dumpster is essentially the location where your messages are going to get stored for a period of time. If you've got database copies out there, the messages will get stored there for a period of time to ensure that those get transferred out to the database copies. Also under message delivery, you can identify IP addresses for servers that you want to be ignored by sender ID and connection filtering. Also, do you have any delivery status notifications, those NDRs? Do you want those to be forwarded? What sorts of codes do you want to be forwarded to the Postmaster email account? So just some basic settings here with the transport server. Not really much that terribly interesting, other than perhaps setting the maximum size of mail that you want to route around your network. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about these ways of using the transport role for setting policies, because all that mail goes through this central location. We've talked about email address policies and how you can configure the automatic generation of email addresses. We talked about transport rules and how you can create rules that essentially define how mail is dealt with as it comes into that hub transport role. And then finally, we talked about journal rules and how you can create this sense of comprehensive message journaling across your entire environment. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.